Welcome to Justice Insight Cam. We showcase raw bodycam recordings of actual law enforcement stops. Beyond the dramatic footage, we carefully interpret the law, the factual reality, and the profound lessons hidden in plain sight. Let's focus on the pursuit of justice.
Stop right there. This entrance is restricted.
I work here. I'm showing you my federal credentials now.
I don't care what card you're flashing. Back away from the door.
I'm a federal judge. My office is on the 4th floor.
People like you always have excuses. Show me real ID.
Am I being detained from entering a federal building until I verify you belong in?
He believed he could stop a sitting federal judge from walking into her own workplace at a secure federal building in the middle of the workday, while every camera rolled. Within 90 minutes, the footage was everywhere. By the end of this story, Officer Ryan Caldwell doesn't just lose his badge. He becomes the catalyst for citywide security retraining and a multi-million-dollar payout. Stay with me, because the instant he understood the entry cameras caught, it all was the instant his career died in the ugliest way imaginable. Before we break down every frame of what happens when ego meets federal authority, comment where you're watching from, and if accountability matters to you, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this weekly. Now back to the federal building entrance where one rookie's assumptions collided with judicial credentials he refused to acknowledge. The morning had started like hundreds before it. Federal employees arriving for work, security checkpoints processing credentials efficiently, the rhythm of a government building operating exactly as designed. The Edward R. Hamilton Federal Building contained 3 district courtrooms, chambers for 7 federal judges, U.S. attorney offices, and the administrative staff that supported the entire judicial district. Judge Angela Morrison knew this building like a second home. She had worked here for 11 years, appointed to the federal bench after 15 years as a federal prosecutor, confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support, and entrusted with cases involving constitutional law, federal criminal prosecution, and civil rights litigation. On the morning of January 12th, she arrived at the Monroe Street entrance carrying her briefcase, wearing her customary professional attire, and holding the security badge that granted her unrestricted building access. Building access logs later examined during the investigation showed Judge Morrison's credentials were active and valid. Her badge was registered to grant entry through all secure checkpoints. Her federal judicial identification was active with no restrictions. Her photograph and biometric data were stored in the security database that controlled electronic locks and monitored entry points throughout the facility. The entrance itself was a model of federal security design: reinforced glass doors with electronic badge readers, security cameras covering multiple angles in high definition, and a posted protocol requiring all visitors to present government-issued identification to uniformed officers stationed at the checkpoint. For employees with valid credentials, entry was typically seamless. Badge scan, verification chime, door unlocks, proceed to elevators. Judge Morrison approached the entrance at 7:45 a.m., earlier than usual, because she had a pre-trial conference scheduled at 8:30. She reached into her briefcase for her badge while walking toward the scanner. Her poor movements were routine, unhurried, completely normal for someone who'd entered this building thousands of times over 11 years. That's when Officer Ryan Caldwell stepped directly into her path. Not to assist, not to verify credentials through proper channels, but to block access entirely. And what Judge Morrison didn't know in that moment was that the next 19 minutes would be captured by 4 security cameras, archived on federal servers, reviewed by multiple oversight agencies, and become the evidentiary foundation for the largest wrongful detention settlement involving a federal building in district history. Within minutes, a routine entry to work became an unlawful detention of a federal judge, documented by cameras designed to ensure security, now exposing constitutional violations. Officer Ryan Caldwell had been posted to the Monroe Street checkpoint for just 6 days. He was 23 years old, 8 months post-academy, contracted through a private security firm that held the federal building's exterior checkpoint contract. His personnel file would later reveal minimal training on federal employee credentials, no instruction on judicial identification protocols, and a troubling notation from his field supervisor. Overly aggressive and challenging individuals he perceives as non-compliant. According to the security camera footage timestamped at 07:45 to 33, Judge Morrison approached the entrance with her badge extended toward the scanner. Before she could complete the scan, Caldwell moved laterally to physically block the doorway, his hand raised in a stopping gesture. His opening words, captured clearly on the entry system's audio recording, weren't a professional greeting or a request for identification. They were commands. Stop right there. This entrance is restricted. Judge Morrison paused, momentarily surprised, but immediately recognizing the pattern she'd seen in cases that came before her bench. Security personnel making assumptions based on appearance rather than credentials. She kept her voice calm and professional. Good morning, officer. I'm Judge Angela Morrison. I work in this building. I'm presenting my federal credentials and building access badge now. She held up both her federal judicial identification card and her electronic building badge, the badge with her photograph clearly visible. Mercer, her name printed below, and the federal seal indicating judicial branch employment. Caldwell glanced at the credentials for perhaps 2 seconds, then shook his head dismissively. I don't recognize that ID format. You need to use the visitor entrance on 3rd Street. Judge Morrison maintained her composure, though the situation was becoming increasingly absurd. Officer, this is standard federal judicial identification. It's registered in your security database. If you scan my badge at the reader, the system will verify my access clearance immediately. Caldwell crossed his arms, his posture shifting from cautious to openly hostile. I'm not scanning anything until I verify you're supposed to be here. Step back from the entrance. That's when Judge Morrison realized this wasn't about security protocols or proper verification procedures. This was about an officer who had decided based on nothing but his own assumptions that she didn't belong in a federal building where she'd worked for over a decade. A second employee approached the entrance from behind Judge Morrison, a white male in his 50s, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase similar to hers. Caldwell immediately stepped aside, allowing the man to scan his badge and enter without question or delay. The contrast was captured perfectly on camera. Identical professional attire, identical badges, identical building access credentials, but drastically different treatment based solely on appearance. Judge Morrison noted the interaction, but kept her focus on resolving the situation professionally. Officer Caldwell, she read, his name from the badge on his uniform. I'm asking you to contact building security through your radio and verify my credentials. My name is Angela Morrison. I'm a United States District Court judge assigned to courtroom 4B. I have a pre-trial conference in 40 minutes, and I need to access my chambers. Caldwell's jaw tightened. I don't take instructions from people trying to talk their way into secure facilities. If you don't move away from this entrance, I'll have you removed from federal property. That's when Caldwell made his first actionable constitutional violation, threatening to remove a federal judge from the building where she was lawfully employed, all captured on federal security cameras. The security camera footage from Camera 3, positioned to capture facial recognition data for all entry attempts, recorded Judge Morrison's expression shifting from patient professionalism to carefully controlled frustration. She understood exactly what was happening because she'd presided over cases involving similar fact patterns, discriminatory denial of access, refusal to follow proper verification procedures, and security personnel operating on bias rather than protocol. Officer Caldwell, I am not leaving. I am a federal employee with valid credentials attempting to enter my workplace. I am formally requesting that you verify my identity through building security. If you refuse, you are violating established access protocols and potentially obstructing a federal officer in the performance of her duties. Caldwell stepped closer, invading her personal space in a manner clearly designed to intimidate. You can request whatever you want. I'm in charge of this checkpoint, and I say you're not getting in without proper ID. Judge Morrison held up her federal judicial identification again, this time angling it directly toward the security camera she knew was recording the interaction. This is proper federal identification. Your refusal to verify it through established channels is creating an unlawful obstruction. That's when the first witness emerged from inside the building, a young law clerk who had been approaching the exit and noticed the confrontation through the glass doors. The clerk, Maria Chen, later testified that she immediately recognized Judge Morrison and understood something was seriously wrong. She pushed open the door from inside and addressed Caldwell directly. "Officer, that's Judge Morrison. She works here. I'm her law clerk. I can verify her identity if there's confusion." Caldwell turned toward Chen with visible irritation. "Ma'am, return to the building. This doesn't concern you." Chen didn't retreat. She pulled out her own building badge and held it up. "I work for Judge Morrison. She's a federal judge assigned to this building. If you contact building security, they'll confirm immediately." Caldwell's face flushed. Instead of recognizing this as an opportunity to verify credentials through proper channels and resolve the situation, his ego demanded he maintain control. I said, "Step back inside. You're interfering with security operations." A second witness appeared, this time another federal judge, Judge Thomas Bradford, who was arriving for his own workday. He approached the entrance, scanned his badge without incident, and the door unlocked immediately. But instead of entering, he noticed Judge Morrison standing outside, in an obvious confrontation with the checkpoint officer. "Angela, what's going on?" Judge Bradford's voice carried the authority of someone who'd served on the federal bench for 23 years. Judge Morrison turned toward her colleague, relief visible in her expression. "Tom, Officer Caldwell is refusing to allow me to enter the building. He won't verify my credentials through security channels." Judge Bradford's expression hardened immediately. He turned to Caldwell with the tone he used when addressing contemptuous behavior in his courtroom. "Officer, Judge Morrison is a federal judge. I can personally verify her identity. Allow her to enter immediately or contact your supervisor." Caldwell's response demonstrated just how disconnected he was from the reality of the situation. "Sir, I don't care who vouches for her. Building security protocol requires that I verify all credentials personally before granting access." Judge Bradford pulled out his cell phone. "Then I'm calling the Chief U.S. Marshal for this district. This is unacceptable." That's when Caldwell delivered the line that would anchor federal lawsuits and ignite national coverage. Words captured with perfect audio clarity on 4 different security cameras. Caldwell stepped back slightly, clearly frustrated that his authority was being questioned by multiple people, and delivered the line that would define his brief security career and cost his employer millions in settlements. "I don't care how many people in suits show up to vouch for her. People like her don't work in federal buildings unless they're cleaning them." The statement hung in the air like a detonation. Camera 1 captured Caldwell's face as he said it. Camera 2 captured Judge Morrison's reaction, a moment of shocked stillness. Camera 3 captured Judge Bradford's expression, shifting from annoyance to outrage. Camera 4 captured Maria Chen's hand moving to her phone to begin recording additional footage. Judge Morrison's response was delivered with the controlled precision of someone who had just heard evidence of bias so clear that no reasonable fact finder could dispute it. "Officer Caldwell, That statement is discriminatory, offensive, and has been recorded by multiple federal security cameras. You have now moved from improper credential verification to actionable civil rights violations. I am formally demanding you contact your supervisor immediately." Caldwell seemed to realize finally that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, but instead of apologizing or calling for help, he doubled down with defensive aggression. "You're twisting my words. I'm just doing my job ensuring building security." Judge Bradford stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding. "Your job is to verify credentials through established protocols, which you've refused to do. You've made a discriminatory statement in front of witnesses and on camera. I'm calling the marshal's office right now." He placed the call on speakerphone, and the conversation was captured by Chen's phone recording, as well as the security camera audio. "This is Judge Thomas Bradford at the Monroe Street entrance. We have a security officer refusing to allow Judge Angela Morrison to enter the building despite valid federal credentials. The officer has made discriminatory statements. I need a supervisor here immediately." The response was swift and alarmed. "Judge Bradford, this is Deputy Marshal Williams. We're dispatching someone now. ETA 2 minutes. Is Judge Morrison safe? She's safe, but being unlawfully denied building access by officer." He read the name badge. Ryan Caldwell. Within 90 seconds, the door opened from inside, and 2 U.S. Marshals emerged, followed by the building security director. The security director, Donald Pierce, had worked federal building security for 19 years and immediately recognized the severity of the situation from the body language alone. "Judge Morrison, I apologize for this incident. Please come inside immediately." He turned to Caldwell with barely controlled anger. "Officer, step away from the checkpoint. You're relieved of duty pending investigation." Caldwell's face went pale. "Sir, I was following protocol." Pierce cut him off sharply. "You refused to verify federal judicial credentials through the scanner system. You ignored verification from a law clerk and another federal judge, and you made a statement that will be reviewed by multiple agencies. You're done at this checkpoint. Leave the entrance area now." One of the U.S. Marshals escorted Caldwell away from the door, while the other accompanied Judge Morrison inside the building, apologizing repeatedly for the incident. Judge Bradford and Maria Chen followed, both offering to provide statements about what they'd witnessed. As they entered, PICE immediately radioed building operations. "Security incident at Monroe Street entrance involving Judge Morrison. Pull all camera footage from the past 30 minutes and preserve it under federal records protocols. Tag it for legal review and notify the administrative office of the courts." By the time Judge Morrison reached her chambers, the security footage was already being archived, copied to multiple federal servers, and flagged for review by agencies that don't take discrimination against federal judges lightly. Judge Morrison sat in her chambers, still processing the absurdity of being blocked from her own workplace. Her law clerk, Maria Chen, brought her tea and sat down with the legal pad, already taking notes with the precision of someone who understood they'd just witnessed something that would become a case study. "Judge, I recorded part of the interaction on my phone, and I know the building cameras captured everything. Do you want me to start documenting witness information?" Judge Morrison nodded, her professional composure returning. "Yes, document everything you saw and heard. Include timestamps if possible, and pulled the Federal Building Access Protocol Manual. I want to review the exact procedures Caldwell violated." Within an hour, the building security director appeared at her chambers with a formal incident report and a flash drive. "Judge Morrison, I've preserved all security camera footage from this morning's incident. 4 cameras captured the interaction from different angles with time-synchronized audio. I'm providing you a copy and filing another with the administrative office of the courts, as required by federal judicial protection protocols. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. "Judge, I've reviewed the footage. Officer Caldwell's statement was indefensible. His refusal to verify your credentials violated our standard operating procedures, and his treatment of you stands in stark contrast to how he processed other employees during the same time frame. I'm recommending immediate termination to his contracting company and flagging this incident for federal civil rights review." Judge Morrison accepted the flash drive. "Donald, I appreciate your prompt response, but I need to know, has this officer had prior complaints?" Pierce's expression darkened. "I pulled his file after the incident. He's been here 6 days. In that time, we've had 2 informal complaints from employees who felt he was unnecessarily confrontational during credential checks. Both complainants were people of color. Neither complaint was elevated to formal investigation because they didn't meet the threshold for official action. After seeing this footage, I realized we should have flagged the pattern immediately. That information transformed the incident from an isolated mistake to evidence of systemic failure to address discriminatory behavior." Judge Morrison made a note to include that in any formal complaint she filed. By midday, Judge Bradford had submitted his own witness statement describing the encounter in detail, and specifically noting the contrast between Caldwell's treatment of him versus Judge Morrison. Despite identical credentials and professional attire, Maria Chen submitted a 3-page declaration with precise timestamps and verbatim quotes from the interaction. The U.S. Marshal Service opened a protective investigation standard protocol when a federal judge reports a security incident that could indicate a threat or civil rights violation. Their report noted the discriminatory language, the refusal to follow verification protocols, and the potential for the incident to undermine judicial independence if judges could be arbitrarily denied building access. And then the pressure waves began building. Within hours, the incident report had reached the administrative office of the courts. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and federal civil rights investigators who specialized in discrimination cases involving government facilities. The response from federal institutions was swift and comprehensive, in a way that local police misconduct cases rarely experience. Federal judges have protections and oversight mechanisms designed specifically to ensure their independence and safety, and those mechanisms activated immediately. The Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, which provides administrative support to federal courts nationwide, launched a formal review within 24 hours. Their investigation focused not just on Caldwell's actions, but on the contracting company's hiring practices, training protocols, and supervision systems that had allowed an officer with minimal federal credentials training to be assigned to a courthouse entrance. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission opened a parallel investigation examining whether the incident constituted workplace discrimination under Title VII. The fact that Judge Morrison was denied access to her workplace based on discriminatory assumptions triggered EEOC jurisdiction, even though Caldwell wasn't her direct employer. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division received a referral from the U.S. Marshal Service. Federal prosecutors reviewed the security camera footage and witness statements to determine whether Caldwell's actions violated 18 U.S.S.A.R. 242 deprivation of rights under color of law. While Caldwell was a private security contractor rather than a government employee, the statute can apply to individuals acting under color of state law or exercising authority delegated by government entities. Meanwhile, Judge Morrison consulted with civil rights attorneys specializing in discrimination cases. They reviewed the security footage and immediately recognized the case's strength, clear video evidence, audio recordings of discriminatory statements, multiple credible witnesses, including another federal judge, and a pattern of prior complaints suggesting deliberate indifference by the security company. The attorneys filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Perf 1983 civil rights violations and Title VII employment discrimination against Officer Ryan Caldwell individually, the security contracting company, and the building management firm responsible for checkpoint operations. The complaint was 43 pages supported by video evidence, witness declarations, and expert analysis of security protocols. Then the story went public. A legal news website that covered federal court proceedings obtained the complaint through PACER, the federal court document system. They published an article with the headline, "Federal Judge Blocked Mo from Courthouse by Security Officer Who Said People Like Her Clean Buildings." The article included embedded video clips from the security cameras, footage that had been filed as evidence exhibits and was therefore part of the public record. Within hours, the story spread across social media platforms. Legal Twitter exploded with commentary from attorneys, judges, and civil rights advocates. The video clips were shared thousands of times. News outlets picked up the story. Cable news ran segments analyzing the incident. The hashtag Judge Morrison began trending as people expressed outrage at the blatant discrimination captured on camera. The security contracting company, Sentinel Protection Services, released a brief statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our officers and Judge Morrison. The officer has been terminated, and we are cooperating fully with all investigations. We do not tolerate discriminatory behavior." But that statement did little to contain the institutional damage. Federal judges across the district began sharing their own stories of being questioned, delayed, or treated with suspicion by security personnel, a pattern that had been dismissed as individual inconveniences, but now appeared systemic when viewed collectively. The General Services Administration, which manages federal buildings, announced an immediate review of all courthouse security contracts and training protocols. Congressional representatives who served on judiciary committees requested briefings. Legal organizations filed amicus briefs supporting Judge Morrison's case and calling for comprehensive reforms. The public pressure was building, but the real accountability came when the security company's insurance carriers reviewed the footage and calculated the cost of defending the indefensible at trial. The security contracting company's legal team faced a problem with no good solution. They had video evidence from 4 angles showing their officer making discriminatory statements to a federal judge. They had witness testimony from another federal judge and court staff. They had internal complaint records suggesting they'd ignored warning signs. And they had a plaintiff with the legal expertise to litigate the case herself if necessary, represented by attorneys who specialized in winning discrimination cases. Their insurance carrier's risk assessment was blunt. This case is indefensible. The video is devastating. The plaintiff is a federal judge with impeccable credibility. The discriminatory statement is explicit. Settlement is the only option that doesn't result in a jury verdict with punitive damages. Settlement negotiations began 6 weeks after the incident. Judge Morrison's attorneys presented a demand package that included not just monetary compensation, but comprehensive systemic reforms designed to prevent similar incidents across all federal facilities managed by the contracting company. The monetary component was significant compensation for the dignity harm of being publicly discriminated against, emotional distress, interference with her ability to perform judicial duties, and the broader impact on judicial independence when judges can be arbitrarily blocked from their workplaces. But Judge Morrison insisted the reforms mattered more than the money. All officers assigned to federal buildings must complete comprehensive training on federal credentials, including judicial identification before being assigned to checkpoints, annual anti-discrimination training with testing requirements, specific instruction on proper verification protocols that don't rely on visual assumptions, all checkpoint interactions must be recorded with audio and video. Any complaint about discriminatory treatment triggers automatic review of camera footage. Officers with multiple complaints are immediately reassigned, pending investigation. Supervisors who fail to address pattern complaints face discipline. Quarterly reports to the Administrative Office of Courts documenting all access denial incidents, public disclosure of discrimination, complaints and resolution outcomes, independent oversight auditor with authority to review security operations. The negotiations took 3 months. The final settlement was laid out like this: $1.9 million paid to Judge Morrison, with a portion designated for a legal fund supporting court employees facing workplace discrimination. Sentinel Protection Services agreed to implement all requested policy changes across every federal facility they managed nationwide, over 200 buildings in 37 states. Ryan Caldwell's termination remained permanent, and he was prohibited from seeking employment with any federal contractor for 5 years as a condition of the settlement. The settlement agreement was filed with the federal court as a consent decree, making it enforceable through contempt sanctions if the company failed to comply with the reform requirements. Judge Morrison released a public statement after the settlement was finalized. This case was never about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that federal judges and all federal employees can access their workplaces without facing discrimination. The reforms we secured will protect thousands of employees across the country. When discrimination is documented clearly, accountability must follow. The Administrative Office of the Courts adopted the settlement's training requirements as recommended minimum standards for all federal courthouse security contracts. Congressional committees cited the case in oversight hearings about federal building security. Law schools added the case to civil rights curricula as an example of effective impact litigation. Officer Ryan Caldwell's brief career ended in termination and a permanent ban from federal contracting, but the institutional changes triggered by his misconduct would outlast his employment by decades. The Morrison case became a catalyst for changes that extended far beyond one security checkpoint at one federal building. Within 6 months, the General Services Administration issued revised security protocols for all federal facilities under its jurisdiction. The new protocols required standardized credential recognition training for all security personnel, mandatory camera coverage of all entry checkpoints with audio recording, immediate supervisor notification for any access denial lasting more than 5 minutes, quarterly audits of checkpoint interactions to identify potential discrimination patterns. The Federal Judicial Center, which provides training for federal judges and court personnel, developed a new module on responding to security incidents that specifically addressed discrimination at workplace checkpoints. The training included case studies based on Judge Morrison's experience and provided guidance on documentation, reporting, and legal remedies. Security contracting companies across the industry revised their training programs in response to the Morrison settlement. The Reform Sentinel agreed to become industry standard, not because companies suddenly developed ethical commitments, but because insurance carriers made clear that inadequate training would result in higher premiums and potential coverage denials for discrimination claims. Federal employee unions incorporated checkpoint discrimination protections into their collective bargaining agreements, citing the Morrison case as precedent for the need to ensure all employees could access their workplaces without facing bias-based obstacles. The cultural impact was equally significant. Federal judges began speaking openly about their experiences with security personnel, who made assumptions based on appearance. A survey conducted by a legal organization found that 37% of federal judges of color reported experiencing some form of discriminatory treatment while accessing carouses being questioned more extensively than white colleagues, having credentials scrutinized unnecessarily, or being directed to visitor entrances despite valid employee badges. That data made visible partly because Judge Morrison's case created space for these conversations led to additional reforms at the administrative level. The Judicial Conference, the policy-making body for federal courts, established a working group on workplace dignity that specifically addressed security checkpoint protocols and developed recommendations for ensuring respectful treatment of all judicial branch employees. Ryan Caldwell's name became synonymous with a cautionary tale in security industry training materials. The officer whose bias-based assumptions destroyed his career, cost his employer millions, and triggered nationwide policy reforms. His LinkedIn profile showed a series of short-term jobs outside the security industry, each lasting only months before he moved on. The permanent ban from federal contracting meant he couldn't work at airports, government buildings, or any facility with federal security contracts, which eliminated most of the security industry's high-up paying positions. Judge Morrison returned to her judicial duties with enhanced authority on discrimination cases. In one notable opinion issued 18 months after her own case settled, she wrote, "Discrimination thrives in the gap between policy and practice, in the moments when individuals with limited authority make consequential decisions based on assumptions rather than evidence. The remedy is not merely punishing individual actors after harm occurs. The remedy is systemic accountability that makes discrimination visible, costly, and culturally unacceptable." That opinion was cited in civil rights cases across multiple circuits and became required reading in some law school civil rights courses. The final measure of accountability came not in court filings or settlement checks, but in the thousands of federal employees who entered their workplaces without incident because one judge refused to accept that discrimination was just part of the job. The complete resolution of the Morrison case took 14 months from the initial incident to the final implementation of all settlement reforms. But the accountability that emerged created a framework that would protect federal employees for years to come. Terminated for cause, permanently banned from federal security contracting. Unable to find stable employment in the security industry due to the public record of his discriminatory conduct, his brief career ended at age 23 because he made assumptions based on appearance rather than credentials, paid $1.9 million in settlement, implemented comprehensive reforms across 217 federal facilities, lost 3 major contract renewals due to the reputational damage from the case, faced increased insurance premiums and additional oversight requirements from federal contracting agencies, returned to full judicial duties, used settlement funds to establish the Federal Workplace Dignity Fund, providing legal assistance to federal employees facing discrimination, became a sought-after speaker on civil rights and workplace equality. Her case became a teaching example in judicial training, law school courses, and civil rights advocacy. Over 3,000 security officers trained under new federal credentials, protocols, camera coverage, expanded at 189 federal buildings. Discrimination complaint review processes strengthened across federal facilities. Pattern monitoring systems implemented to identify officers with multiple complaints. Annual reporting requirements ensuring transparency and accountability. The Morrison case proved several critical principles about accountability in the modern era. The security cameras that were installed to protect the building ended up protecting a federal employee from discrimination. Multiple angles, synchronized timestamps, and audio recording made denial impossible. Every federal facility now understood that cameras weren't just security tools. They were accountability mechanisms. Judge Bradford and Maria Chen could have entered the building and left Judge Morrison to resolve the situation alone. Instead, they stopped, witnessed, and documented. Their corroboration transformed a he said, she said into an undeniable record of discrimination. Judge Morrison received swift, comprehensive institutional support because she was a federal judge. That response highlighted the gap between how powerful individuals experience justice versus ordinary citizens facing similar discrimination. Her case became a vehicle for closing that gap by extending the protection she received to all federal employees. The security company didn't implement reforms because they suddenly cared about discrimination. They implemented reforms because Judge Morrison had the legal expertise, resources, and institutional support to make resources under non-compliance more expensive than change. Within 2 years of the Morrison settlement, federal employees reported increased confidence in challenging discriminatory treatment at checkpoints. Security officers became more cautious about making assumptions. Supervisors took complaints more seriously. The culture shifted because the systems demanded it. This is what accountability looks like when systems work as designed. Not because institutions are inherently just, but because evidence was preserved, witnesses stepped forward, and someone with power used it to demand change that benefited everyone, not just themselves. For Ryan Caldwell, the lesson came too late. Bias destroys careers when it meets documentation. Assumptions crumble against credentials. And in the age of cameras, discrimination doesn't hide. It multiplies across platforms until accountability becomes unavoidable. For security professionals, the lesson is clear. Verify credentials through proper channels. Treat everyone with professional respect, and understand that your assumptions about who belongs in professional spaces say more about your biases than about the credentials in front of you. For federal employees, the lesson is empowering. Document everything. Know your rights, speak up when you witness discrimination, and trust that when evidence is clear and advocacy is persistent, systems can be forced to respond. For Judge Angela Morrison, this was never about revenge or publicity. It was about dignity, the right to access your workplace without being criminalized for existing while Black. It was about using her position to create protections that would outlast her tenure and benefit employees without her resources or authority. The cameras were recording, the witnesses were watching, the systems were forced to respond, and this time, accountability came with a price tag that made discrimination too expensive to tolerate and reforms too comprehensive to ignore. Officer Ryan Caldwell learned what every person with any authority should understand. Credentials matter more than assumptions. Evidence doesn't lie. And in the modern world, where cameras document everything, bias-based decisions don't just end careers. They trigger institutional changes that prevent the same harm from happening to thousands of others. The entry cameras that caught everything didn't just cost Caldwell his badge. They bought accountability, transparency, and systemic reform that will protect federal employees for generations.
Thank you for watching today's analysis. If you found this information valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to Justice Insight Cam. Stay vigilant, stay secure, and join us for our next detailed report.